To me, nothing demonstrates a person's character more than what they do with an absence of evidence, because when they don't have an obvious truth, they tend to project what they want the truth to be. And what you want says something about you, not to mention the fact that they'll just roll with it without further investigation, and present it as truth with zero shame and hesitation. To me, it's important to notice these sort of things about yourself so that you can recognize when the devil on your shoulder is talking to you. Because the problem with the devil is the temptation to believe him when he tells you that you're right. I'm also a person who sees all deaths as tragedies. Despite how vindictive people get and love to indulge in the suffering of people they don't like and are quick to label revenge as justice, to me, if anyone dies, it's a collective failure. And if we kill the killers, we've failed twice. I'm not willing to settle for less than the minimum possible harm for everyone involved, including criminals. To a lot of people, I know that's the point where someone's pain stops mattering. But that's because I believe we're capable not just as individuals of reforming, but as the same species that sent men to the moon to be capable of building systems that can reliably and consistently reform people. We even have evidence of that, just mostly outside of America, unfortunately. On the opposite end, we also know what happens when we treat people like criminals and tell them we're never going to stop treating them like criminals. Weirdly enough, people who are told they are beyond redemption don't tend to try to redeem themselves. So when I can pick between some grotesque indulgence in someone's death or prolonged misery and the ability to turn a criminal back into a contributing member of society, I have the gall, arrogance, and sheer audacity to pick the latter. If gaining a member of our community is a win, and getting rid of a criminal is a win, then being able to do both is simply twice as valuable. And it feels like we've lost sight of the value of forgiveness, the peace of mind it can give ourselves, and the future peace of making today's enemies tomorrow's allies. As that sort of person, I feel that potential better future being directly threatened when I hear people looking for reasons why George Floyd's murder was justified. More so when they don't take even a second to reflect on what that says about them. Furthermore so when the person in question is speaking to an entire community and telling them that this is fine. That you don't need a justification to prioritize your own need for validation, even when it affects the dignity of the dead and the needs of those affected. I just want to know what I'm supposed to think about a person who looks at a video of a man long past being even a possible threat, being pinned down under the collective knee of at least 3 officers for 9 whole minutes as he lost dignity, consciousness, and eventually his life, and then decides to go look for reasons for why this man deserved to die, as if there could be any. Think of any reason, remind yourself that he was already detained, and say out loud, therefore he deserved to die. Do any of them seem reasonable? Any of them warrant further investigation? But then nobody seems to speak up about it. So is it the devil on the shoulder phrasing it differently? It's worth it for some higher purpose, maybe? That your actions don't matter, but rather what you act in behalf of. Interesting take. And this man they've subscribed to, when somebody who would consider part of his tribe, the people, as he said he reserves the luxury of empathy for, dies, he points his anger not only at those directly responsible, not just every looter, but every protester. He sure likes to paint with a broad brush. And his reason? That the protesters are enabling the looters, not that it's the looters taking advantage of the protests. It's the protesters giving license to the looters, as if they have that power, not to mention as if they want to undermine their own protest. So then why? How? Like I've said at the beginning, there's no evidence here, no rational line of thought to follow, which really begs the question. What does that say about you when it's so important to you that innocent protesters be grouped in with the criminals, that evidence and due process stops mattering to you, assuming that they ever did? And yet, when George Floyd died, he did not demand the entirety of the police force to be held responsible. This group, his group, for some reason is held to a lower standard. Even when the information is publicly available that the police are expertly trained to mishandle situations. Most people don't think that mismanagement should fall on the majority of police themselves, because we have every reason to expect that individual police go in with the best intentions, because they're supposed to serve and protect. That's the same expectation we should give to the protesters. Most of them convey they want to fight the system and not the police force, and yet they aren't granted the same benefit of the doubt. If you look at the bad actions of a few and hold the majority accountable, no matter how thin the association, you better be consistent about it. So when you neglect the tragedy of George Floyd and the thousands of deaths leading up to it and deny the protesters their frustrations, but treat David Dorn's death as so uniquely cruel that the protesters, who are far removed from the actual shooters, don't deserve empathy, I think I'm owed an explanation. You want to treat me like I put a bullet in David Dorn? Do you want me to treat you like you put your knee on George Floyd's neck? Treat you like you had 9 full minutes to reconsider smothering him? Do you feel like taking responsibility for picking the future where George Floyd is now dead? Are you about to go to court for the thousands of cases of malpractice which police have walked free from? Because according to you, supporting bad behavior makes you one of these bad people. Do you feel like going to jail yet? Or do you think that I maybe should treat you like you're innocent and just don't understand where I'm coming from? But maybe you just don't care where I'm coming from. Do you have any idea how frustrating it is to have to be the one to extend an olive branch to somebody trying to beat you with theirs? To try to tell you that I will try to forgive you for how you treat me, even as you try to hold me accountable for the actions of strangers. Do you even consider my own urge to lash out at you when you lash out against millions of innocent people? Do you expect me to praise you if you somehow manage to hit a bad guy in the process? I really wonder how you're expecting me to treat you. With hostility? Is that what you want? Because you don't seem to hesitate to conclude that only bad people do bad things, and that bad things should happen to bad people. So when you treat me this way, is that what a good person does? Or maybe I should just hold you to a lower standard when you can't even meet your own. But maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm supposed to try to get into your good graces. But how would I do that exactly? Because I'm already not looting, not rioting. I don't condone these things. In fact, I condemn them, but that doesn't seem to matter. I'm honestly at a loss of what else I'm supposed to do. Shed my political beliefs, maybe. Kill the left. Does a middle ground even exist with you? Were you belittled for so long that you now go on the offensive so you don't have to deal with disagreement? Does that sound like a healthy way to cope with discussion? Or have you been preaching to the choir for so long you don't know how to address anyone else? Remember what I said about redemption? If I'm just going to be treated as guilty even when I haven't done anything wrong, what reason do I have to treat you with kindness? Because the only reason I have left is to do good for goodness sake. But that only seems to be reason enough for one of us. Why should I have to keep turning the other cheek when you could just man up and stop slapping? Is this actually how you think productive dialogues go, or is it that dialogues and mutual understanding just aren't that high on your list of priorities? To me, it sounds like having your political views validated is more important than those conversations, or even making sure the people responsible are held accountable. And there's part of the issue. Who do you consider responsible? For George Floyd, we know how the incentive structures of the systems affect the psychology and behavior of those following it, and have decades of history of its failures on which we can base improvements on. The people we are holding responsible are the people in charge of the laws and regulations that keep not just allowing, but causing these tragedies. The broad brush on the cops tapers to a point, the lawmakers. That's a pretty specific target. The protesters aren't holding an innocent majority of police responsible like you are with the protesters. They're holding the people in charge of the police responsible. However, with David Dorn's death, the shooters, as of writing anyway, there's nothing to indicate they so much as protested. And even if they did, there's no code of conduct among the Black Lives Matter protesters that promotes looting. And even if there was, there's no leader responsible for changing them. In the absence of either, even if they were guilty, what are you going to do? Gun them down in the streets? And yet there's no evidence, which makes the only conclusion you can reach is that the looters who shot David Dorn are the only ones responsible for his death. There's not even a hint of a conspiracy. So in the absence of evidence, what do you bring me? You bring me an unexplainable desire for the protesters to be seen as equally culpable to the shooters, despite the lack of any justification for it, and then expect me to accept it as reason enough. This is who your mother raised. This is who you choose to be. You don't seem to like to blame circumstance, upbringing, or societal systems. So what is your excuse for this behavior? One of the issues with the police is that they're trained to be an active shooter rather than a reactive one. The justification being that their lives are on the line, which is great for the police in the situations when they are. But the outcome is completely predictable when you're told to shoot first and the other party doesn't even have a gun. And when you know police are trained in this way, who would wait? It results in people getting shot, including the officers. I don't know about you, but to me being prepared to kill is not the same type of conviction as being prepared to die. And I don't like the idea of giving those in charge of your safety the same mindset as those of the criminals threatening it. Random acts of violence scare the shit out of me because they're random. They're out of my control. If I can't see it coming, I can't prepare for it, and I'm powerless to do anything against it. I'm not even part of the group where this statistic is more than random, but I don't have to be to feel nauseated by the irony that you're likely to be a victim of the people who are supposed to be protecting you. After David Dorn's murder, you should have empathy for everyone. Everyone is losing somebody they care about and something they believed in, like human decency. And everyone could use some support getting through this. George Floyd's death is a tragedy. He was smothered to death for 9 minutes when he should have been taken into custody. David Dorn's death is a tragedy. He was shot in the line of duty when he should have lived on to be able to keep serving his community. I shouldn't have to be liberal or conservative to mourn the death of either, and if your political leaning is so much more important than those actually affected that you try to use David Dorn's death, I find that disgusting. If more deaths come out of this, I hope we recognize them for the tragedies that they are, and not the political tools some use them for to justify hate towards larger innocent groups instead of the ones we can prove are responsible. Don't give up on empathy, and those with empathy won't give up on you. And if this is all the reason you need to put your empathy and morals aside, or that you never even had this much to begin with, Anthony Brian Logan, I'm worried you might be a lost cause. If this somehow reaches the families of those affected, I hope you have the peace, love, and support that you need to get through this, because you shouldn't have to deal with any of this on top of everything.